Hi, my name's Tom Carpenter. I'm an attorney who represents many clients in the travel and tourism industry. And in addition to my law practice, I also own a small travel agency. I spend a lot of time in my law practice working with other travel advisors and tour operators, putting terms and conditions documents together. And interestingly enough, today, of all days, one of those key provisions in my terms and conditions document for my business came into issue. And so I wanted to just share with you a little bit about what happened to my business. So this is a very brief presentation on how to handle a chargeback if, heaven forbid, something like that happens to you. First of all, just a couple of professional responsibility things to get out of the way. This is my name, the address of my law office, and how you can get in touch with me if you need to. A few professional responsibility disclosures. This is probably viewed by the states where I'm licensed as attorney advertising. It's for informational purposes only. I'm not intending to provide specific legal advice. And by viewing this presentation, it's not creating any kind of attorney-client relationship. And of course, prior outcomes don't guarantee future results. So those of you who've seen other webinars or presentations that I've done before, you've probably seen this, slide. I start everything, my premise for just about everything that I do when I represent travel and tourism clients is that travel is a high-risk industry. There are all sorts of things that can go sideways when you're booking travel for people. And for me, the key in managing that legal risk is, even though there's a lot of risk out there, you can always get out in front of it. And the two things that you should be doing is having really well-crafted documents and policies that you use in your business, and having a solid and consistent workflow to make sure that you don't miss a step. So I want to talk a little bit about terms and conditions policies, because whenever you're dealing with a chargeback, your terms and conditions document is going to be really important. I think you need a terms and conditions document that really is your boilerplate for all the trips that you do, whether it's a school group, whether it's an FIT booking, simple hotel and resort, hotel or resort, airfare transfer booking. Structure it as a legal agreement. Make sure your clients actually sign on to it. There are some templates that you can find online if you don't have one of your own, but you also might want to consider getting a custom drafted terms and conditions document that really is going to work for the parameters of your specific business. So the main provisions in a terms and conditions document, there are legally required disclosures, things like airline tickets having an expiration date. That's something that if you're selling air, that's a disclosure that you're legally required to make. Seller of travel numbers in some states you need to disclose. Agent versus advisor, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Advisories to clients, you have duties to your clients that you're obligated to advise them of risks in a very general way, that type of thing. Disclaimers of liability or responsibility, that's really, really important, that you want to make sure that your clients understand that you are not on the hook for anything that your supplier does that creates liability for you. And of course, we're all dealing with force majeure provisions these days with COVID and the so-called act of God provisions, but that's not really what we're primarily focusing on today. So for a chargeback, your terms and conditions document is really critical, especially to the extent that you're explaining to them the difference between your role as a travel agent and your role as a travel advisor. So as a booking agent, this is why we have called ourselves travel agents for so long. We are agents of the supplier. You are the supplier's agent, and you have a fiduciary duty to the supplier, which means that if you're making a payment using your client's credit card, using their payment information to make a payment with the supplier, you have a duty of care that you are actually authorized to use their payment to do that, because the supplier could suffer adverse consequences if you are making an unauthorized charge using your client's payment info. But as a travel advisor, you also owe a duty of care to your client. And so your terms and conditions document really needs to make it clear that as the booking agent and as a travel advisor, you are in that middle zone between the supplier and the client. I think that you also need to make sure that you've got best practices set up in your workflow. So you need to have your clients affirmatively agreeing to your terms and conditions, and there's no magic to wet ink on paper. For most of the time, checking a box will usually suffice, unless there is a specific waiver of legal rights, in which case you're going to want to get a signature. But you also are going to need, in addition to having them affirmatively agree to your terms and conditions document, you're going to need a sound credit card authorization. So setting yourself up so that you're protected, the first thing is you want to make sure that your terms and conditions include language that you want to make sure that your terms include language clarifying that your client is agreeing that, except in cases of fraud, they are not going to initiate a dispute over a charge that you make on their card. If it's legitimately authorized, then they're not going to later try to take it back by initiating a dispute with their credit card company. Of course, you can't stop them from disputing fraudulent charges, but if you're getting that credit card authorization, then it's not fraudulent, or it shouldn't be fraudulent. You're also going to want to have a record that they agree to your terms and conditions. I use, in my travel business, I use TravelJoy, and I have my clients agree to my terms and conditions by checking a box on my client agreement that they agree to my terms and conditions. I also have them agree to my terms and conditions a second time whenever they make a payment through the credit card authorization function in TravelJoy. You can use lots of other tech tools. There are DocuSign, Adobe Docs. There are lots of CRM systems out there that will let you build customized forms, but you want to make sure that you are getting a specific authorization to charge their card. Okay, so here's the situation. You just got an email from a supplier that your client's initiated a chargeback. So what do you do? My recommendation is that because you are a booking agent for the supplier, that you owe that fiduciary duty to the supplier. So at that point, the first thing that you should do is to provide them with the documents that show that the charge was authorized. So give them a copy of the invoice, give them the record in whatever system you're using that shows that the client authorized that charge in that specific amount on that card. And if you may also want to show them that they agree to your terms and conditions, but really, you're going to want to first engage with the supplier. And I would suggest avoid putting yourself in an oppositional position to your client at this stage in the resolution of the dispute, because if you provide the supplier with the information that they're requesting and that's the end of it, then you aren't running the risk of getting a negative Yelp review from a travel agent that's upset because they're not getting a refund that they want. So take care of what you need to take care of with the supplier first and foremost. If you do, if that doesn't resolve it and you do wind up getting a debit memo, or the supplier winds up coming after you for the amount of the disputed charge, at that point, that's when I would recommend that you open up a conversation with your client. Explain the consequences for your business and let them know that you've provided information to the supplier at that point that shows that the charge was in fact authorized. And the way I would have this conversation with them is essentially to say to them, oops, that's a little bit farther than I wanted to go. So here's an example of how I would have that conversation with the client. So Brittany, I know that you are upset that you didn't get a refund and instead you got a future travel credit, or your reservation was non-refundable, whatever the situation is. And I was advised by the supplier that you initiated a dispute with your credit card. And maybe you didn't realize this, but when you agreed to my terms and conditions of booking, you specifically agreed that you weren't going to file a credit card dispute for a charge that was legitimately authorized. This isn't a case of fraud. You did authorize me to make that charge on your card. And I'm sure you probably didn't appreciate this at the time that you initiated that dispute, but it's entirely possible that the amount of that disputed charge could wind up coming out of my pocket because I was the one who used your payment information to make the payment with the supplier. So I'm sure you didn't intend for me to pay $20,000 of your canceled trip, but can we at least have a conversation whether there's some other way that we can work to solve this problem? That situation is that's kind of how I would open up the conversation with the suppliers. See if you can trade on goodwill to get them to pull back from the credit card authorization. But push comes to shove. If push comes to shove, and they've agreed to your terms and conditions, and they violated your terms and conditions by disputing a charge when they've agreed that they wouldn't do that except in cases of fraud, then conceivably you could go into court, show a judge your terms and conditions, show the judge the paperwork, and say to them, Your Honor, my client violated their agreement with me by disputing this credit card charge, and I was damaged to the tune of $20,000 plus attorney's fees, etc. And the judge would enforce your agreement as binding, assuming that your clients affirmatively signed onto your terms and conditions. So using the right tech tools is really important here. I mentioned TravelJoy earlier. I use TravelJoy because it has a really good credit card authorization function, and you can build customized forms. Many of these other tech tools are also there. In your client agreement, this is what I recommend that you use. I am hiring name of your agency to plan my trip, and I agree to their terms and conditions of booking, which are located at this link, and then you link to the page on your website where you've got your terms and conditions. For your credit card authorization, again, this is kind of overkill, because if you've already had them agree to it in your client agreement, having them agree to it a second and third time when they're making payments on their deposit, when they're making payments on their final payment for their trip, it's overkill, but it's also ensuring that you don't miss a step. So it's kind of belts and suspenders. Keep in mind, checking a box is more than sufficient to create an agreement. Whether they go to your website and actually read the terms that they're agreeing to is their responsibility. But think about all the times that you've downloaded software and checked a box saying to Apple or Microsoft that you agreed to their terms and conditions. Well, that's creating a legally binding agreement for you. If they're waiving legal rights, that is a little bit different. So I recommend that you actually get a signature on the credit card authorization or on any kind of participation waiver, an insurance waiver. Those things, you should have a signature, but electronic signatures are going to be okay in that case. So key takeaways: start with a strong terms and conditions document and credit card authorization. Engage with the supplier first to see if that's the end of it. And avoid opening that can of worms with your client unless you're actually being damaged by their violation of your terms and conditions. At that point, you can decide whether you want to risk having them go to social media and leave a negative review for you, or whether you need to actually take them to court and file some sort of action to enforce your rights under your terms and conditions. So again, I'm Tom Carpenter. I'm an attorney representing a lot of travel clients across the country, and I am more than happy to talk to you if you would like to talk to me about your terms and conditions document. If you're facing a chargeback and you need a sounding board, feel free to give me a call and let me know. Thanks so much, and I hope everyone's booking a lot of travel and staying safe out there. Thanks.